Hi, this is Jim Pons. I was the bass player for the Leaves, the Turtles, and Frank Zappa's Mothers of Invention. I've been honored to be part of the show with John Liebman for BassPlayersOnly.com.
Hello and welcome to ForBassPlayersOnly.com. I'm John Liebman, founder and first baseman. You know, a lot of people think they're too old or it's too late for them to learn how to play an instrument. So I created For Bass Players Only for people mostly over 50, adults who want to learn to play bass, because I believe you're never too old and it's never too late to experience the joy and the pleasure of making music. For BassPlayersOnly.com. Let's play bass. My special guest this week is Jim Pons. Jim is a bassist, an author, a singer, a video director. Back in the 60s, he founded a very successful California band called The Leaves, and he was the bass player in the Turtles from 1967 to 1970. And he played with that band on the Ed Sullivan Show a couple times, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, American Bandstand, all those shows. Jim also played with Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, and I do want to ask you about that. And through a fascinating sequence of events, he went from an entry-level job in the New York Jets, working his way all the way up to video director for the team. And he even designed the team's logo. His award-winning autobiography is called Hardcore Love, Sex, Football, and Rock and Roll in the Kingdom of God. This is his first time on For Bass Players Only. Welcome, Jim. Good to have you here.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. It's an honor.
All right. I read the book and enjoyed it very much. Lots of great stories. And you talked about, near the beginning of the book, you talked about the early days and how you first got exposed to music. Can you share some of that story with our audience? Tell us about your musical upbringing and how you became a bass player.
I grew up in the 50s when rock and roll started. It seemed to start. Elvis Presley, Fats Domino, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, all the great masters started performing, and I used to love listening to them. They were all older than me, and they weren't really models of something I could do. But I honored them, and I loved them. And I listened to all their music. I bought all their records. I listened to them on my transistor radio at night until the battery died under my pillow.
Yeah,
but they were always unreachable, inaccessible. They were stars in the music business. So it's as close as I could get. But I bought all their records, and I was a big fan. I never thought of myself as a bass player or any musician. I didn't play any music. I just loved music.
Well, there weren't too many prominent bass players back in the 50s. So Monk Montgomery, okay. And I don't know, earliest I could think of was maybe James Jamerson, but that was in the 60s. When you discovered the bass eventually, did you have some bass player influences, any bass heroes?
Yes, I had several. Well, the first was Paul McCartney. It was Paul McCartney and the Beatles. Seeing the Beatles on Ed Sullivan was a game changer for me, because before that, all the people I liked in the music business were older and, as I say, and unreachable. And here were four guys my age playing their own music and writing their own songs. And I thought, this is it. This is what I want to do. This is the best. And Paul McCartney was the bass player, and somehow I gravitated to him because I seemed to hear the bass parts. I like the bottom. I've always liked, the bottom and the resonant, a thing that holds everything together. Plus, he was an amazing entertainer and a great singer, and and the bass only had 4 strings. So I figured that's if I wanted to be a musician, that'd be a good instrument to start on. And that's really
So
what happened.
was he the first real bass player that you noticed? Was he the one that got you interested in bass, or were you already interested and then
Oh,
you saw?
I didn't know any bass players up until then. You never heard about the musicians that played behind Elvis, or I mean, I didn't. Fats Domino, Little Richard. You didn't learn who knew their bass players. It was only when the Beatles came out and they had names and faces. That's when I discovered the bass.
You were a pretty early member of the Turtles. I think I read in the book they were in the middle of recording an album when you joined the band. How did that all come to be?
Um, they were they had Chip Douglas was the bass player for the Turtles, and they were recording the album, the Happy Together album, and Chip quit. Chip decided to produce. He wanted to leave the group and produce the Monkees, which it had been invited to do that, and he told them he had to leave, and so they asked me to join the band. I knew him from a couple of years. We'd been playing on the Sunset Strip, my band and the Leaves, and they're the Turtles. A lot of bands in those days were playing on the Sunset Strip. You could see the Doors, you could see Frank Zappa and the Mothers, Iron Butterfly, the Birds, the Turtles. Everybody was playing on the Strip, and we all knew each other. So when it came time for the Turtles to need a bass player, they knew me and they they knew I could play. They were fans of my band, and so I said, "Let me think about it for a minute," and then I said, "Sure, I'll be your bass player." I had to tell my band, the Leaves,
I
that I was
remember.
going to. I had to tell my band, the Leaves, that I was going to move on. I felt bad because I'd taken those guys out of college. We were all fraternity brothers, and we were learning how to play music. And I was the one now that was going to move on, and I felt bad about that for a while. But I was advised that this was a good career move, and I should take it, and I did. And they all went on to their own lives, and they did okay.
Now, I remember Flo and Eddie. And when I was in high school, they had a song called Your Future's in Your Lap, So Keep It Warm. Well, why did the guys, your former turtle mates, Howard Kalin and Mark Volman, why did they call themselves Flo and Eddie?
Well, it was a long story to get to Flo and Eddie. The Turtles had to disband because of a lawsuit with our record company, and they owned the name the Turtles. So when the Turtles disbanded and Mark and Howard joined Frank Zappa, and then I joined Frank Zappa, and we played for like 3 years after the Turtles, and then Frank got injured, as you remember, and we had to we disbanded. We left the Mothers, and we decided we can either just retire or we had a good band. We just couldn't play with Frank anymore. We had Ainsley Dunbar on drums and Don Preston on keyboards. And so we wanted to keep playing, but we couldn't be the Turtles because we still were in that lawsuit with White Whale Records, who owned the name. We had 2 road managers, roadies, that traveled with us for a couple of years. One of them was really clean cut and college like, and the other one was very hippie with long hair and beads and necklaces. And we called him, we called the clean cut one the fluorescent leech, and we called the hippie guy Eddie, the fluorescent leech and Eddie. That was what we called our road managers. And when we decided to continue to be a band and didn't have a name, it just occurred to us that that would be a decent name to use until we got the name Turtles back, which we were trying to do. So that's what we called ourselves, the Fluorescent Leech and Eddie, which was shortened to Flo and Eddie.
Which one was which? Didn't they flip flop at one point because of a picture or something to caption or something like
It
that?
was never clear. I think Mark, the curly-haired guy, wound up to be the fluorescent leech, but it was never defined. At least we never defined it.
Okay. Well, going from the Turtles to Frank Zappa, that's very different kind of music, but everybody knows the song Smoke on the Water. And if you listen to the words, Montreux, Switzerland, Frank Zappa and the Mothers, some stupid with a flare gun. You were on stage when that happened, right?
I was indeed.
You were performing. All right. So let's hear the story from you firsthand. What happened?
We were in the middle of our encore. We had played for 90 minutes, I think, and we were in the middle of a King Kong, which was the encore we were using in those days. It was a beautiful old wooden theater, historic theater on the coast of Lake Geneva in Montreux, Switzerland. Wooden theater, old theater, several balconies. And at one point during the last song, I noticed a little bit of a fire, a little bit of a light in the balcony. And I mentioned it to Mark, and he noticed it. And then Howard noticed it, and it looked to me like a sparkler that you have at, I think, 4th of July, flashing like that. And then all of a sudden, it got bigger and bigger, and it fell out of the balcony down onto the people in the main section. And then everybody started screaming because it got bigger. And they started rushing to the stage because, well, I guess a lot of them ran the other way, but a lot of them ran toward the stage and started getting up on the stage with us. And our road manager said, "Drop your guitars, follow me." And we did. We dropped our guitars and we ran backstage through a curtain and a door and down the stairs. we were in the kitchen. We realized there was no way out of the kitchen, but back up the stairs. So we had to come back up the stairs, and the smoke was already coming down the stairs. Excuse me. And we got out of that door, and we were in another room with no exit, and we heard this loud smash, glass breaking. Our bus driver had wrapped a towel around his arm and busted through a glass wall, which we pried open and crawled through and wound up out on the loading deck of the theater, where we stood with the Swiss fire department and watched it burn to the ground over the next half hour. And yeah, and then next, I guess Deep Purple was across lake on the other side of Lake Geneva. They were going to play there the next night, and they watched it burn down, and they wrote "Smoke on the Water." So that's how that happened. And the next day, we toured the building, and where it was just a bombed out shell of a building, and all we found was Ainsley's cowbell. Everything else had been lost. All our guitars, all Frank's guitars, all our sound equipment, all our lights, everything we traveled with, gone.
You were allowed back in the building? It must have been dangerous to be walking around.
Yeah, it was smoldering, but they let us in.
Wow. On, I guess, a lighter note, what was it like working with Frank Zappa? That must have been quite an experience.
It was an amazing experience. Zappa is an extraordinary human being. I knew him for quite a while. As I said, on the Sunset Strip, we all knew each other. We saw each other play, had meals together, and we were friends before I joined his band. And just like the Turtles, he didn't even audition me. He just said, they were in London, England, making a movie called 200 Motels. I was playing with a little country band in California. Not much, not much hope to succeed in the music business anymore, but not knowing what else to do yet. And I got a call from Mark Volman, who told me Frank needs a bass player. He told him to call me. Mark told me, Frank told me to call you and see if you're available, interested. And again, I said, sure, sounds like something to do. It'd be a good job. I wasn't in love with his music, although he did have some good bluesy stuff that I liked a lot. But I couldn't read any of his music, and he wrote it to be perfected. But I took the job. I couldn't. He needed me to come to London, but my passport was expired, and I couldn't come. So they finished the movie with I don't know who was in the movie. Did I tell you their bass player quit during the movie? Frank's bass player quit while the movie was being made. So again, I just kind of was in the right place at the right time. So when they got back from London, I went in the studio with them and did some bass parts and a lot of vocal overdubs, and then we started rehearsing for a tour, our first tour. And then I realized what I was getting into. I think he dumbed down a lot of the bass parts for me because he knew I couldn't read music for one. I had to go to Ian Underwood, who was one of the keyboard players, and ask him to play my parts so I could hear it. And that's how I learned them. And Frank really expected you to know him and learn him and play him the way he wrote them. And if you didn't, he could get kind of ornery.
Who else was in the band in that generation? The Fowler brothers, I guess. Maybe Ruth Underwood. Who all was?
Ruth was playing the what do you call it? Xylophone. She played xylophone, and Ian was on keyboards, and Don Preston was on keyboards. Ainsley Dunbar was the drummer. Mark and Howard and me.
Wow.
And Frank.
So that was what? Early 70s, I guess?
Yes, 1970.
Okay. Because I saw Frank, I think it was around 1978. Would I have seen you in that band at that time?
We were told after the fire, let me step back here. After the fire, we still had 5 weeks left on this European tour, and Frank very graciously let us vote to decide whether we wanted to continue or not. He's not normally wasn't a democracy at all. He was the leader, but he asked us if we wanted to continue the tour, and we said yes. So we had to rent new equipment, amps, guitars, everything, which we did, and we rehearsed for 3 weeks. And our next show was the Rainbow Theatre, I think, in London, England. And that's where, again, at the end of the show during our encore, some guy jumped up on stage and pushed Frank into the orchestra pit in front of the stage, and we were all shocked and surprised and scared. We looked over the side, and he was way down, like 15 feet down below, and lying on his stomach, but his head was turned sideways, and his arm, one of them was behind him, and one of them was in front of him. He looked quiet, still, and he looked like he could have been dead. And that was the end of. They told us he's not going to play again. He's going to be in the hospital for a long time. That's where we saw him the next day when we were on our way to the airport to go home. He was lying in bed, wrapped in white all the way head to toe. And so there we were with a good band and no band leader, and no hope for a band leader. And that's when we decided to start Flo and Eddie.
Got it. How long were you with Frank in all?
About a year, did 2 or 3 tours. We had to do, he was a huge star in Europe. And he wrote an opera called Billy the Mountain, which had a German intro. And all of us had to speak German. And we took tutoring lessons from a German woman for like a month before we went on the road, learning all our parts. And my dad was born in Holland, so I knew some of the guttural sound of the voice, the German voice, and he liked that. And he gave me all the good parts. I played the part of God in the beginning. In the beginning, when there was nothing but God, a girl, a pig, and a maroon sofa. That was all that existed. And that's where the universe came from.
Leave it to Frank.
And I got to play the part of God. And we learned all that in German, and it was a big hit. We didn't know what we were saying, but people loved it. They laughed and they loved it.
That's funny. Let's switch gears.
It all came to an end that day in England, and we had to move on to the fluorescent Leech and Eddie.
Let's switch gears. I want to ask you about the New York Jets, because it's an incredible story, and I know it's kind of a long story. You talk about it in the book, but it's such a great story. Can you condense it a bit for our audience? What was your experience with the Jets? Where did you start, and where did you end up?
I decided at the end of the Flo and Eddie tour, my last Flo and Eddie tour with Alice Cooper, actually, the $1 Billion Babies tour in 1973. It was 102 days, 91 nighters in different cities. And I turned 30 years old in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I said, I'm through with this. This is the end of my musical career. I don't want to pursue this anymore. I did 12 years or something like that. So I'm going to do something else. I didn't know what, but I told Mark and Howard, our last show was in New York, and I met a young lady that I thought I liked, and I wanted to see her again. And I didn't know how, if I quit a band, I wasn't going to be able to come back to New York. So I decided I'd quit the band and I'd move to New York. And just before I left for New York, an old friend, John Beck, who was with me in the Leads, wrote me and said, I didn't know you were coming to New York. I'm in New York. I hadn't talked to him in years. He says, but I have a job and I have to leave it because I've been online. I've been waiting to be accepted at ABC News as a film editor, and they just hired me. But I have a job now, and I need somebody to take it because I don't want to leave them in the lurch. It's the New York Jets football club, and I'm an office boy there. And all I have to do is mail Joe Namath posters and polish the Super Bowl trophy on Monday morning. And if you take it, I'd appreciate it, and you'll make $115 a week, which is pretty good back there in 1973. And I said, yeah, okay, it sounds good to me. I'll do it. And that's what I did. I took the job as an office boy, the Jets. When I did, I mailed Joe Namath posters and polished the Super Bowl trophy. Got the president at lunch his bagel and the lox and bagel sandwich every day. That turned into That turned into an opportunity to be the assistant equipment manager. The World Football League started while I was there, 2 years after I came to the Jets. And the assistant equipment manager left the Jets to become the head equipment manager for the New York Stars. And by then I got to know the head equipment manager, because I don't know how much detail you want me to get into. The Jets.
Well, one thing led to another, and you eventually became, what was it, video director?
Oh, yeah. First, I became the assistant equipment manager. And then, so I started working with the team instead of the office girls in Manhattan. And Weeb Eubank, the legendary head coach, was the coach of the Jets. And he found out I was from Hollywood, California. And we were building a training center. The Jets were at Hofstra University on Long Island. And in those days, the teams had a film company that shot the game films and then delivered the films to the coaches the following Wednesday, which was not good. They wanted them faster than that. And teams around the league were hiring film people to be on the staff to shoot the games, develop them and edit them and hand them over to the coaches Monday morning. And so he asked me if I knew anything about the movie business. And I made up a line that I still tell the story. I told him back in Hollywood, they called me Cecil B. DeMille Jr. I never knew anything about movies. I didn't know how to shoot a camera. I didn't know anything. But that was all it took in those days. That's all he needed. He said, I'm going to start this. We're going to have a training center, and I'm going to have a film lab, and I'm going to need you to run it. And I said, I'm the man. So the place was built. The studio was put in place, a big machine where from 8-10 feet long with processing chemicals the films had to go through, and printer. I had to learn all that. And I did. I learned how to shoot a camera. I had a camera that I had to wind between every play, 16 millimeter film. But I was a single kid. I was 25, I guess, or something like that. And I had all the time in the world. So I spent all the time in the lab, in the studio, learning how to run things. And I did. And that's how that started.
An incredible story. And you go into a lot of detail in the book, which is very enjoyable to read. Something about out in the rain in the stadium, and one thing.
Oh, yeah, it was pretty hazardous.
You mentioned, I remember Mark Gastineau. I certainly remember him. Did you know Marty Lions very well?
Oh, yeah, very well. I knew all those guys. Joe Klecko, Marty Lions, Abdul Salam, Mark Gastineau. The New York Stock Exchange.
Reason I mentioned Marty Lions, I used to live right next door to his brother in Miami for like 4 years. His brother Jim.
Yeah, well, he was a great guy, Marty. So was Mark. All those guys were nice people, and they were very friendly. My wife and I got married in the interim after, a few years earlier, and my wife and I started a foundation for children with autism. And Marty Lions was our sponsor. He was like a charter member of our organization. So he worked with us and did our auctions and our fundraisers, and we got to be very close friends.
That's beautiful. Did you get to do much music making or bass playing during those years that you were with the Jets?
No. The girl that I had moved to New York with, we played music for a while. She liked country music, and I love country music. So we had a good partnership there for a while. But she was interested in writing her own music, and I'm not a fan of modern country music. I like old country music. The older, the better. I mean, the kind of music that came over on the boats. That's the kind I like. and bluegrass is what I always loved the most. And I always wanted to be in a bluegrass band. By the way, can I tell you a story about how I met the
Please.
Beatles? The Beatles,
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
I can cut it out if you don't want. We were in London once and playing, I forget, the Bag of Nails, I think. And the Beatles came to see us. And I sat and talked to Paul for a while. And
Excuse
I
me,
was so impressed with,
you were playing with the Turtles or
yeah,
Flo and
Turtles.
Eddie or
No,
Turtles?
this was
Okay.
when the Turtles had She'd Rather Be With Me, which was #1 in England at the time. And we were there touring. And the Beatles, John, Paul, and Ringo came to see us. And I met Paul, and I was so starstruck. I told him they were the inspiration for our music and for our lives, basically. He didn't want to know about any of that. He wanted to talk about She'd Rather Be With Me. He wanted to know the chords of She'd Rather Be With Me. That was amazing. We talked about music a lot, and I told him, but someday I'm going to be in a bluegrass band. That's what I really want to do, because that was what I really wanted to do. And I said, and you got a song that I'm going to play one of these. And when I get in that band, you have a song I'm going to play, and I do. And I'm in a bluegrass band now, and I do play a song called I've Just Seen a Face. And it's a big hit when we do it. So there I was in New York, and I was playing with a girl that was writing her own songs, and I didn't care for it. And I wanted to play Bill Monroe and Stanley Brothers. So we stopped playing music, and that was it. I didn't play bluegrass music until I got to Florida, where I am now.
I have fond memories of Florida. Well, let me ask you about bass, playing bass and learning bass. ForBassPlayersOnly.com is primarily a bass instruction site. And I've got people from pretty much all 50 states now and some 50, 60 countries worldwide coming to ForBassPlayersOnly.com every day to learn how to play bass. And most of the people are 50s, 60s, 70s. I had somebody sign up recently who was 83 years old. So they're not trying to make a career out of it. They just want to have fun and play some classic rock riffs with their buddies or some blues shuffles or maybe some bluegrass or, some funk R&B, whatever. A lot of times, the arthritis kicks in and the tendonitis and those kinds of too. So I'm painting a picture for you. So within that context, what do you think is important for somebody like that who wants to learn to play bass? What kind of advice could you impart to those students?
I probably should have told you this before we started. I don't want to disappoint you or your viewers or your readers, but I don't know. I don't know. I really didn't. I'm not. Everybody in your magazine is talented, and I feel like sometimes that I'm just an actor, and I acted as a bass player in the first scene or the first act of my life. And then I acted as a film guy. I didn't ever felt like I never felt like I was born to be a musician. I was just able to do it. It was a cool, fun job. I don't know. I don't know how to read or write music. It was just, I taught myself how to play a few notes and how to hit record. I don't know what to tell people. I can't.
What was your thought process? So you think of yourself as a non-musician who
Yeah,
somehow figured out how to play an instrument. Well,
that's
how
right.
did you figure what was going through your mind to say, okay, I need to move my fingers like this? That there must have been something that you were striving for, and it must have been more than just a mechanical thing. There must have been something in your heart or in your soul or something that made you want to make music. Can you comment on any of that?
Well, as I said, Paul McCartney was a major influence. And so I tried to learn as much as I could, watching him, listening to him. but I enjoyed this bottom parts. Enjoyed the bass parts, and I found out where the notes were on the bass to play them. And when I started out in the 60s, 64, 63, 64, all the hit records were like three chords. There was nothing complicated about it at all. Anybody could have done it. And that's what I did. And as the music got more creative and complicated, I managed to learn. I copied people that I heard, and I watched them on television, and I didn't invent anything new. I played simple parts like Stu Cook. I was talking to him. He played the bass. He knew where the bottom was, and it was an important part of the music. And I worked with the drummer to create a bottom for everybody else. I didn't care about showing off. I couldn't. I didn't know enough to show off. I played the bottom, and I played simple, and it was easy. It's not hard to play the bass if you. I mean, there are people who are virtuosos. John Entwistle, for instance, or I mean, I can't. I don't even relate to that. I was just kind of a blues, rock and roll kind of guy. Learned enough to get by, and was lucky enough to be in a hit making band, a couple of them. But I moved on to something else, and I never looked back.
What's keeping you busy?
I enjoy playing now. I'm in a bluegrass band, and I've always wanted to play in a bluegrass band. It's a very simple form of music, especially for bass. Still back to three chords again. And I learned how to play the stand-up, though, because traditional bluegrass is no electric instruments.
Right.
But it's a huge thing, and I have managed to get rid of it. I have what's called a U bass now. It's like a ukulele. And
right?
It's being accepted in the bluegrass, traditional bluegrass circle. It's a lot easier to tote around.
Yes, it is.
And,
I know exactly
I got a band called Lonesome Ride, and we play a couple times a month. We rehearse every week, and everybody sings, and we get along. All old timers like me. We have a lot of fun.
Oh, that's great. What about the future? What else would you like to do that you haven't already accomplished? Is there something that someday I'll or anything like that?
I don't really think much about it until it happens. Something happened recently that I'm venturing into next. Somebody who read my book wants to make a screenplay of it and make a movie, turn it into a movie. And I'm working with him now. We're writing a screenplay of my movie. My book is going to be a movie. Which I've been told, I've been told that it has enough interesting stories to turn into a movie, and I believe it can be. It's going to be decent. So that's going to be the next adventure. I don't know what it'll
lead. Let me know when. I'd like to watch it. Let me know when it's out.
Well. We're putting the scenes together and deciding what's important and what isn't, and it's a very interesting experience. I'm enjoying it.
What do you think you would have been had this music thing not come along? What would you be if you weren't a bass player?
I was studying art in college. I was in college for 2 years before I started the Leaves, because I have some art ability. And as you said, I designed the Jets logo when they wanted to change the helmet style. So I have some art ability, and I'm gonna paint. I do paint now. I started painting, and I took a continuing education class with 5 little old ladies couple of years ago in University of North Florida, and the teacher liked me and said I should pursue it, and I've been painting. And,
Well, that's great.
and my wife and I bought property in Roatan just recently, and we're going to retire there and live there and grow coffee and I'm going to paint and sell my paintings in my twilight years.
Wonderful. That's beautiful. Well, you're a fascinating man. You've got a lot of great stories, and we could have dug so much deeper into the Turtles and Flo and Eddie and Frank Zappa and the Jets. And maybe we'll do a follow-up interview.
I'll be here. I'll be happy to see if I can give you anything that you don't know.
Well, there's plenty I don't know. Well, thanks so much for spending this time with me, Jim. It's great. The book is called Hardcore Love, Sex, Football, and Rock and Roll in the Kingdom of God. Jim Pons, thank you so much for being my special guest this week. I wish you all the best in the world.
I appreciate it. Thank you, John. Thank you for including me in your long list of famous bass players.
It's a pleasure and an honor. You're watching ForBassPlayersOnly.com. I'm John Liebman, founder and first baseman. A lot of people think they're too old or it's too late for them to learn how to play an instrument. So I created For Bass Players Only, for adults who want to learn bass, because I believe you're never too old and it's never too late to experience the joy and the pleasure of making music. ForBassPlayersOnly.com. This is the place to learn how to play bass. Thanks again to Jim Pons. I will see you all right here next week, same time, same place. In the meantime, let's play bass.